So just to introduce myself, I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Bizza.io. We're a startup. Most of us are in Brisbane. I'm the only Melbourne representative at the moment. My history is that I've been in IT for over 30 years now, mostly in technical roles. So I've worked in customer support, I've worked in pre-sales, I've been a consultant, worked my way up to regional CTO at an identity management vendor previously, and have been involved in the consumer data right, which I'll talk about in detail later on, since the beginning, which is about 2017. My other claim to fame is I was on the CDR advisory committee for 2 years, so the government decided to have a vendor representative, and that was me. So let's talk about FAPI and how that affects developers and other people working in the API industry. To start off with, I just want to answer the question, who is Bizza? So I mentioned that we're a startup. What we do is services, solutions for the consumer data right. So we provide both data holder and data recipient solutions. We have 11 brands in production. 3 are going into production very, very shortly in the October-November timeframe. We also provide a sandbox which allows data recipients to build their solution to talk to data holders in the ecosystem. So if you don't know what all that means, stay with me. I'll be there in a minute. Let's talk about the financial grade API known as FAPI. Can I just get a show of hands? Who knows what FAPI is? Who's heard of it? All right, so we've got a little way to go with some of the audience. That's all right. FAPI was really born out of the need to go beyond OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. If you look at those, can I just say everyone knows what OpenID Connect is? Great. All right, so we know that OAuth 2 is an authorization framework for delegating authorization. OpenID Connect is an extension on OAuth 2 for authentication. What FAPI provides is a layer on top of that. So it adds some JSON data schemas, some security and privacy protocols, and also a back channel authentication method, which is very useful for things like making a purchase at a petrol bowser. So you're not actually present there, you're making a purchase as a back channel to the identity provider there. Really, what FAPI provides is a method of armouring OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. So OAuth 2 is a very useful protocol. It is quite open in the way it deals with security. So what people discovered when they wanted to go into schemes like open banking and other data sharing of very private and the need for secure data sharing, like the consumer data right, there was a requirement to provide additional armouring around the OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect protocol. And that's what FAPI is. It's an open standard. It's managed by the OpenID Foundation, who do OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, and it provides those additional functions. So let's talk a little bit about what those additional things are. Now, FAPI's a process that's happening. There is what's called the FAPI 1.0 baseline, which is the current set of standards that we're all working to. The baseline has a couple of different aspects to it. The first is for public clients that you might use in an OAuth 2 situation. It really cuts down what the requirements are there around security. So the client has to actually, it requires the server, in effect, to store and compare the redirect URI. It requires the use of nonces and states, and it requires the verification of scopes. So for a server to be FAPI compliant, it must actually do all of these things. Whereas an implementation in the OAuth 2 space, really, you don't have to do that to be compliant with that particular spec. Importantly, for things like open banking, there are confidential clients, and that requires additional functions on top of what the public clients require. So mutual TLS is a requirement there. It requires different types of key lengths and key types, and it actually cuts down the ciphers that are required for those interactions. So you can see here we're starting to take what was a very flexible and open way of doing delegated authorisation and authentication and starting to really securitise it, if I can bastardise the English language there. This is really important because when we talk about open banking and, in Australia, open energy and other things, we're really looking at consumer data which is very, very private, things that you wouldn't want to leak, things that if you do leak, the regulator will fine you $2 million per leak. So it is serious business. This is a serious protocol that can be used to secure that. And then beyond the baseline, there's what we call FAPI 1.0 Advanced, and this provides a number of other requirements that, again, are used in the open banking and consumer data rights space. So FAPI 1.0 adds things like pushed authorisation requests. In the OAuth 2 space, you can send query parameters along with the request. Again, all out in the open, goes into logs and so on, not very secure. So PAR is a method of providing that in a post to a specific endpoint in the OpenID server to enable that to be a very secure transaction when those request parameters are sent. Again, if we're using APIs for payments, you need to have that very secure. In terms of other things, like you can read what's on the screen there. There's issuance that's constrained to different tokens, limits the expiry of the request object, limits the authentication requirements for those interactions as well, and supports things like signed encrypted IET tokens. So again, what we're doing is we're taking a very open spec and bringing it down to something that is very secure, very much around industry best practice for that. So if all of that was a bit over your head, you weren't really sure about that, here's the takeaway. Don't try and do this yourself. This is not an area where you can write a server that's FAPI compliant unless you have many years of experience in the security business. There are many FAPI compliant servers out there. If you are working in those industries, I would recommend you check them out. And some of them are open source, I believe, so that is available in the industry. So let's move on, talk about the consumer data right. This is the space that I've worked in for a number of years now. It really is the future of data sharing and open data in Australia. Who here has heard of the consumer data right? Excellent, excellent. Who here works in banking? Okay, a lot of people. Energy companies, anyone here? Excellent. What about telco? Anyone telco? No. Insurance? Superannuation? Nope. Alrighty. So what the consumer data right is Australia's open data ecosystem. It was mandated by the government a couple of years ago and is rolling out across the ecosystem as we speak. So the participants in the consumer data right are firstly the organisations who hold consumer data, so banks, energy companies, telcos, insurance, superannuation, non-bank lenders and so on. Those organisations are mandated by the government to allow consumers to share their data with accredited third parties. Those third parties are known as data recipients. So data holders are designated by the Treasury. There's a rolling scope of work to actually bring all those different industries online. Currently, we have banking in production now. So if you go to your bank, there'll be an option for data sharing. You'll be able to initiate a CDR data sharing flow from an accredited third party. Some of those might be Frollo, for example, who do personal finance management. It might be another bank. So the other bank can ask you to share data and they can start to offer you new services based on what they know about your spending patterns and your fees and so on. Data recipients must be accredited by the ACCC. They can be sponsored into the ecosystem by other data recipients. And importantly, they are required to erase any data that the consumer shares with them when that consumer revokes consent. So this is a big change from what we've seen in the past with, international companies who trade on data. That data lives forever, and they use it amongst third parties, often without your implicit consent. The CDR aims to stop that happening by enabling explicit consent and a very easy way to find out where your data is being shared and how to revoke access to that. And finally, the ACCC is one of the regulators in the ecosystem. It manages the registry of participants. So this is not, even though I say it's open data, it's not open to everyone. You have to be accredited, or you have to be an active data holder to be in this ecosystem. Apart from that, they also main the conformance tests, which is meant to make sure everybody works together. Unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment. So where are we in the CDR rollout? At the moment, if we look on the right-hand side, banking is in production now. So you can share your banking data right now. Energy is coming on as of the 15th of November this year for the big 3 energy companies. Incidentally, BIZA is delivering 2 of those big 3 energy companies as data holders. Then non-bank lenders, the designation instrument has just been released by Treasury. It has a 30-day comment period. We expect non-bank lenders to be required to be in production in the next 12 months or so. Likewise with telco, that process is ongoing, and insurance and superannuation. I heard the other day that superannuation is the next one to come in off the back of that. So as you can see, the government's very aggressive in bringing industries into this ecosystem, allowing consumers to find out if they can get better deals based on their data. Now, a bit more about CDR. In terms of the InfoSec piece, it's all based on FAPI 1.0. It has very strict specifications around the APIs for that data sharing. The information security piece, which includes things like dynamic client registration, non-functional requirements. So, for example, you must supply this data to the consumer through the data recipient within 1.5 seconds, and very strict pieces around the consent flow and so on. So you're working in a very regulated environment when you're in the CDR. The issue for most organisations is that they don't have the talent in-house to develop a solution like this, which is where BIZA is able to meet those requirements. If we have a look really around the complexity of the ecosystem here, you can see a data recipient on the right, and the other boxes is the data holder piece. So there are endpoints that work through TLS, so with a public CA, others TLS via public or the register CA. There are others which are MTLS via the register, and others that are TLS via AEMO, which is the energy regulator who holds some data for energy. So again, you can see complexity here. There is a lot to be done if you were to build your own solution. Thankfully, there are things out of the box that help you if you're in that space. Also, what you need to be aware of is the additions to not only FAPI, but the above FAPI itself. So within the FAPI space, you've got things like PIXI, you've got PAR, you've got self-signed JOTs and so on, and different types of authentication. So the issue most people have is they might go to Auth0, who we saw previously, or Okta, or one of those guys. They can't support the additions to FAPI that the CDR requires, and hence the number of vendors who can support this is very limited. So let's quickly talk about that. The CDR does go well beyond FAPI, so it introduces some custom claims, some of which have very important impacts on the way that tokens are used. It limits the acceptable ciphers to those in a FAPI version 2 draft, which hasn't even been ratified yet. It enforces PAR-only authorization request data submission, so if you don't support PAR in your OpenID server, you can't work in the CDR. It requires JARM, and there's a current requirement that mandates PIXI. Unfortunately, not all the data recipients support PIXI, so guess what happens when you mandate something and the other side doesn't support it? They don't work together. So again, this is on the government to work out what meets the requirements for industry and bring those mandatory requirements in at the right time. If you're interested in discussion on those sort of things, then please go to the GitHub site for the CDR. That's all an open process, and you'll see a lot of the discussions there. So what does this mean if you're looking to implement a solution for the CDR, if you're looking to take on this FAPI compliance piece? Well, acknowledge that it's a very complex specification set. Off-the-shelf solutions like Okta and so on can't comply, or if you're working with another piece of software, you can get access to source code, they're going to need significant rework. The issue with the CDR is it keeps changing as well. There's a lot to keep up with. So the ACCC have new obligations. All of those obligations are time dated. If you don't meet the time obligations, you have two options really. One, you get a fine, or two, you have to request a remediation schedule, and then they check in with you regularly to see how you're going. You're on the clock then. So it's a pretty significant situation to be in. There are some new things coming down the track. So action initiation goes beyond data sharing. Data sharing is what we call read access. Action initiation will allow accredited third parties to write to the data holders, to instantiate payments, for example, to create a new customer account on the fly, to close a customer account. So what could we do with that? Well, if you think about it, if I'm a bank, I want to sign up someone for a home loan, imagine if I could get hold of, through consented data sharing, their energy data and their telco data. I could, through joint ventures and third parties and so on, offer them energy free for the first 3 years based on their current energy sharing. I could offer them internet and mobile use plans free for the first 3 years based on what I know about their usage. So you can see the sorts of value that come out of data sharing. And then with action initiation, I can switch them very quickly and automatically through APIs built to that specification. So you can see how this makes it easy for the consumer. It makes it very valuable for people who work in the ecosystem, the data holders and the data recipients. And a whole lot of new opportunity comes out of this CDR data sharing and action initiation environment. So along with that, we have additional technical requirements to implement. For example, rich authorization requests and grant management are in scope for the action initiation work, which is due to be discussed early next year. FAPI 2.0, which is a read-write specification that work will track, is coming again fairly soon. The issue I mentioned earlier is that the ACCC has already started to fine people who are not compliant. So there was a bank recently got fined $130,000 for not being compliant. So, six-figure fines are not to be sneezed at, especially if you're a smaller organisation, and that's kind of the limit of your profit in a year. So really, just to finish off there, FAPI is something that is going to sweep the API world. It is the next generation of security around APIs. What it means in Australia is that a lot of industries will need to take on the CDR because they will be mandated by the government. And if you want to make use of that data, you also have to be accredited as a data recipient, so you will have to work to these specifications. So understanding this is pretty important for what data sharing in the open data economy in Australia in the next few years is all about. If you would like more information, please feel free to check out the OpenID site for FAPI, the Consumer Data Rights Standards specification site. You can go to bizza.io and read my CEO Stuart Lowe's blogs on the decision proposals for the CDR and the ongoing battle to make sure things work in this ecosystem. And if you want to try out this yourselves and you don't bank with someone who is a data recipient, you can go to Regional Australia Bank's data recipient application. It's free to use. It's only data sharing for a one-off time and they don't actually store the data. So it's used as a test site in the industry to make sure the CDR flows are working with different data holders. So no matter who you're banking with, you're most likely to be able to test out data sharing in the CDR with that application. So look, thank you very much. Been a pleasure to be here, and any questions? I think we've got a few minutes, so yeah.
What about logging and sort of data or record retention requirements?
Logging and record retention? Yes. So there are very strict record retention requirements. Yes. It's specified in the CDR rules, which are produced by Treasury, and that's all documented online there. Yep. Another, this man in the front here, yeah.
Can you please talk more about FAPI 2.0 and if you're aware, other than Fixing and JAM, which is 1.0a, what new things are going to be in 2.0?
Yeah, so the sort of things that are coming in 2.0 are what I mentioned previously with the CDR piece. So rich authorisation requests, being able to do that very rich consent modelling and so on is look like it's coming into 2.0. And grant management as well, I think, is being discussed in that. There are a few other, these specifications are an alphabet soup of acronyms. So, yeah, I advise you to go and look at the spec, but that's all I have time for. Man behind you, yeah.
A couple of questions. As a consumer, how do I know who's got my data through this infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
And the second one, is there a reasonably well-defined description of what a consumer is? And the reason I ask is I work for an energy company that's traditionally B2B, but we are looking at sort of ad hoc interactions with the great unlock. So would that be something that's falling into our remit?
Yeah, so the first question was about how do I know who's got my data? So all data holders are required to have a consent dashboard available to consumers. So if you go into your bank, there should be a tab called data sharing or something similar, and that lists the consents that you have previously applied. You can revoke consents from there. You can actually view historically who has had your data. And there is a method which you can request that information as well through the rules. The second one is who does this apply to? So there are specific rules around who the data holders are. In energy, it is all energy companies with more than 10,000 customers, I believe. So the big three are November this year. The rest of the energy companies within that range are November next year. That said, I'm talking to a lot who want to get there before November next year, because what happened in banking was everybody thought, oh, this will be easy, and it wasn't, and suddenly they've got a deadline coming up, and they go to the vendors and say, can you help me? And the vendors say, sorry, I'm delivering 15, in the next 3 months, I can't help you. And suddenly, oh, got to go to the ACCC and ask for forgiveness.
Great, thanks, Matt. But we are unfortunately out of time.
That's all right. Happy to continue the conversation after.